I think deep down, whether we want to vocalize it or not, I think most people in this country feel that, yeah, it's over for democracy in reality. That it's just, you've got the Epstein files that never were released, right? Big cover up there, clearly. So, it's just powerful people are never held accountable, and it's just not going to happen. And I think the vast majority of us believe, the powerful and the elite get what they want in this country. And that has become really, really abundantly clear.
Well,
So
but
it's
that
already
that
dead in a lot of ways.
and that's precisely the problem. If you want to, I believe Trump believes in the Constitution. I believe people around him do believe in America as written down. Um, they have their own interpretation of it, obviously, but they're not going to just throw the documents out and replace them with something else. Had he wanted to do that, he would have crossed the Rubicon, so to speak,
I mean,
back
I
in
think we
January
did cross
20.
the Rubicon with the Epstein files. I mean, I think we're already there. I mean, I think
Well,
that
so
even with the
so
Trump administration, look, we don't have democracy. We're not getting what we want.
So the crossing of the Rubicon specifically in this context refers to Caesar disobeying the orders of the Senate and crossing the Rubicon with his army and marching into Rome and saying, okay, I'm the emperor now, screw this.
Uh huh.
Paraphrasing, obviously, from Latin, but Trump didn't do that in 2021. The whole January 6th was an insurrection story is just as bogus as Russiagate. Because
Right.
had he wanted to take over by force, by a color revolution, because January 6th, the whole storming of the Capitol thing looked very much like these color revolutions in Eastern Europe, thematically. Had he wanted to do that, had he actually wanted to seize power, he would have seized like TV stations and then the parliament and then would have proclaimed himself the legitimate president for life or whatever, and would have said, okay, but he didn't. He basically he said, no, you need to go home. We believe in law and order. We believe in peace. He never personally acknowledged the validity of the 2020 election, but he never called on anybody to violently overthrow it. The fact that
Right.
his enemies accused him of it anyway shows you what they think about principles or rule of law or the meaning of laws or the meaning of the Constitution. That's a whole different issue. But as you said, we are at a critical juncture, though, because the thing with the Epstein files, as you said, and this is why I believe the White House really mishandled them, the entire issue, is
Yeah.
that Trump's supporters, people who voted for him, whether they're lifelong Republicans or recently disappointed Democrats or anybody in between, they're tired of politics as usual. They're tired of the Clinton and Bush dynasty switching switching their place in the saddle while the American public is the horse. They're
Hmm.
tired of the same old of politicians saying, "Oh, we can't do that. That can't be done." Yes, it can. You can just do things, right? Remember, that's the motto of this administration. There's many things that have already happened that everybody was saying, "No, they can't be done." They've already happened. They've been done. The stuff that requires political will, that's the easy part. In execution, the hard part is summoning up the political will to do it. The hard part is like reindustrializing the country. That's going to take ages and a lot of investment and a lot of hard work. That's the hard stuff. But things like shutting down the border or illegal immigration, that turned out to be much, much easier than people said. So again, can we just do things? Can we do politics as usual? Can we ensure that the people who literally conspired against the government of the United States, against the legally elected government, the entire system of electing our leaders, can we ensure that they are punished for this and that will never happen again? So that's why I'm thinking they're not kidding with this referral to the DOJ, because they have to mean business. And let's jump forward to about a year ago in Butler, Pennsylvania. We still don't know anything about Thomas Matthew Crooks. Who's investigating this? The same FBI that conjured up Crossfire Hurricane?
Yeah.
That where secrets go to die? Like, we need to know. We need to find out. Because if we don't know these things, you can have kooks going saying, it's Israel is trying to kill Trump, Iran is trying to kill Trump, Ghana is trying to kill Trump. They're reading into it whatever they want, and people believe them because, well, there's no other narrative. There's a narrative vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. So we need the
Right.
truth. And the folks that again, you got Kash Patel, who literally dug up the Steele dossier story as part of his congressional duties, now heading the FBI. I would like to believe that he's not going to basically defecate on his entire career and legacy by running cover for what? The deep state?
He already
No.
has. He's
I,
done. He's toast. Nobody trusts him.
I mean, that's the
He's
point.
gone.
Well, that's the
I
thing.
mean, no one trusts any of
Because
these guys anymore. With the
because of the
Epstein
Epstein thing,
files,
yeah. Because of
yeah,
the
I mean,
Epstein
this is
thing,
it.
so now they have to prove that they mean business, and maybe they will,
That's why
maybe
I
they
think
won't.
this whole thing's a distraction. I mean, look, like I'm fascinated by these documents. I think it's great that we're finding out. I do think that there's clearly a criminal conspiracy there that needs to be dealt with. But I also think this dump was just a distraction. I think that they just want us to stop talking about the Epstein files. And they're like, here, let's give you some other files. Let's give you
Well,
some
I
other
mean, if that
files.
was the plan, it's obviously failed because now we're talking about all of this stuff in connection because it is all connected.
Of course it is. And the other thing that a lot of people should be asking is why now? I mean, that's why I do think it's a cover up to cover up the fact that they didn't release the Epstein files. This is just a distraction because why now? Trump was in office. By the way, this was released by DNC or DNI director Tulsi Gabbard, right? Who was the DNI director under Trump previously? Oh, it just so happens that guy Ratcliffe is now the head of the CIA.
Hmm.
Why didn't he release these
He was
documents?
one of so he was the DNI in the first half of the Trump administration, and there were he was in Congress working with Trey Gowdy and that crew that sort of covered up
He
RussiaGate
was
and
at
that
the end.
escaped.
He was like in 2020 to
Uh,
2021.
well, if memory serves me, they had him replaced temporarily by Rick Grinnell, and then the whole thing went to Gina Haspel. But refresh my memory if I'm wrong.
I just looked it up. He was the director of national intelligence from May 26, 2020 to January 20th of 2021.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
So
and he
he
was
was,
succeeded.
yeah.
Yeah, he was at the very tail end. So the big question is then why didn't he do this? Like, why are we just now getting the documents under Tulsi Gabbard? Why wasn't him or anybody before him during the Trump administration releasing all of this? And then why would this guy then be put in as CIA director, after not releasing any of these documents? I mean, it just smells of a bit of a,
That has
yeah.
baffled me as well, to be perfectly honest, because Ratcliffe was not one of the people that I would have trusted because of his track record from the first administration. So obviously Trump knows something that I don't here, but because yes, he was exactly the Dan Coates was the guy who he put in first, and he was definitely working with the deep state to deep six this thing. Um, and Ratcliffe ended up getting put in place after Rick Grinnell was had served out his interim position, like acting whatever, and he couldn't be
Yeah, but
confirmed.
I mean, what if Ratcliffe is also part of the deep state? I mean, this all kind of adds up a little bit where it's, here you have Ratcliffe, who was the DNI. He didn't release these documents at that time when, Trump was absolutely demanding answers to this huge scandal.
Guess who was head of the CIA at the time?
Who was head of the CIA at that time, actually?
Well, it was Gina Haspel, I
Oh, it was
believe.
Haspel. That's right.
And Michael Pompeo had been head of the CIA at the
Ah,
start. Now we're getting somewhere,
right.
and then he got put into the State Department, and he basically and as I said, the whole first administration was stacked by neocons who were
I, I,
working
I
against
mean,
Trump's agenda.
I
Trump,
still think this one is too. I mean, Ratcliffe now being CIA director and us not getting the Epstein files. A lot of us think that, obviously that Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were working for Mossad, but also probably the CIA. It
well,
was probably a double run agency and a
I think
blackmail
what they're
operation.
trying.
And now you've got the head of the CIA and
So
no
there's a
Epstein
wonderful,
files.
yeah, there's a wonderful Serbian saying that I think applies in this case. Uh, the mother was not reprimanding her son for gambling, but for making up excuses afterwards. So the gambling here was obviously the problem. If we're by gambling, we're using as a euphemism for whatever Epstein did. Um, but trying to cover it up is obviously creating a bigger problem. It's not the crime; it's the cover up. Same thing in states. Um, the the White House is in a very delicate position right now because of Trump trying to dismiss the Epstein thing as some kind of Democrat fabrication, when RussiaGate is the literal Democrat fabrication, is doing him no favors. He's done some rather incredible things that I didn't expect him to do because my expectation of him was the first administration, very low.
Mhm.
And he surprised me over and over again. So we'll, as he says, we'll see what happens. Like, I will believe that they're serious about this if the DOJ starts handing out some serious indictments and going after some of these ringleaders of Russiagate. Now, I have a perfectly innocuous explanation as to why this was released right now. Because Tulsi was given free reign to go after these people, and she had been targeted by Democrats. She had been put on a no-fly list. They went after her personally because she criticized Hillary Clinton.
Mhm.
So she has a personal axe to grind, and she wasn't going to cover for these people. And
Mhm.
neither should anybody else, to be honest. So, and she's releasing it now because it's been 6 months. It takes 6 months to put this stuff together, run it past the lawyers and all this other stuff. You don't make a criminal referral, like I'm making a case here. You needed to withstand a court challenge. Now, the question is where they're going to charge them, because if they charge them in D.C., all of these same judges who were in on this scam from the beginning are going to be their judges, and the jury is going to be comprised of 90% of Democrats who live in D.C. as part of the permanent bureaucracy. So it's like they didn't accomplish anything. But that's a different issue.
Right.
I'm not going to relitigate that. What I'm trying to zoom out here is that I think there's a perfectly good political reason, and not just Epstein related, and not just internal politics related, to release this stuff now and reveal that um, Russia didn't do what they accused her of doing.
Right.
And that is the Ukraine war that's looming over this entire business, because it's a direct outgrowth of, of the restarted war. Let's backtrack for a minute. I'm just going to be really brief, not like Putin in his interview with Tucker. Um, So you have the 2014 coup in Kiev as a sort of a trigger that the U.S. government is behind, that the Obama administration approved, and Hillary helped set in motion, even though she was not Secretary of State at the moment. And you have both parties in on it. The deep state. You've got McCain. You've got a couple of Democrats sort of acting together as a perpetual warfare motion machine. But my experience is that Obama his mind necessarily wasn't into it. He was prioritizing wokeness at home. And
Mhm.
so he ended up being like, oh no, Russia bad. Here's sanctions, because he didn't really expect them to retake Crimea. Uh, and then this thing sort of goes into hibernation with the Minsk agreements. Well, in 2016, when the Democrats decided they're going to blame Russia for everything and they're going to restart Cold War with Russia, they turbocharged the matter. And they start a diplomatic war. You get diplomats being expelled. You're getting journalists being arrested. You're getting the censorship industrial complex wound up. I bet that Taibbi and the crew that were investigating Twitter files and all this have stories to tell, but they're essentially concluded, and everybody else who looked at the Twitter files concluded, that it was Russiagate that kicked it off. It was Russiagate that triggered censorship at home, that we're
Right.
still living under. YouTube just announced that, oh, we deleted 11,000 channels that belong to Russia and China. You're boasting of this 6 months into the Trump term. Are you people insane? Trump
Mhm.
should let the EU sanction the hell out of you, see how you like it, instead of, going to defend you like Rubio promised to. Whatever. But again, this starts the conflict with Russia. And then this conflict, when Biden gets into office, essentially something, I would be really curious as to getting the actual files from the 2021 summit between him and Putin, between Biden and Putin in Geneva. Because I'm convinced that something happened there that broke the relations, and that 6 months later resulted in kinetic warfare. But
Yeah.
you get this, and you get the Nord Stream thing, and you get Kamala Harris going into the stage of Munich saying we're going to get Ukraine into NATO, and next thing you know, there's Russian forces crossing the border, and we're doing all out kinetic proxy war, and there's thousands, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people getting killed, and the EU and the US going, oh, we're fighting a world war, but we're not really fighting, so they're trying to have it both ways. And all of this stuff is seeded back in Russiagate, with the, again, uh, what a part of Russiagate basically was that Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, had been a secret conduit to Russians. He wasn't. He was sending information to a Ukrainian oligarch who was paying him. But
Mhm.
he was working for the opposition to the Ukrainian government, and therefore the Ukrainian government was like, well, we've got this fake dossier of accusations against him, so put him in jail. So they did. And he was accused of collusion with Russians that completely did not exist. Then you had the Ukrainians collaborating with the Democrats to accuse Trump of some kind of undue foreign influence in that call with Zelensky that they impeached him over back in 2019.
Hmm.
Like all of this is tied together. All of these deaths, all of these lies, all of this corrosion and destruction of the American Republic and the very fabric of the country. Because let's face it, if we don't, if Americans can't rely on they can't rely on their media telling them the truth anymore.
Right.
The dollar has, lost a whole bunch of value. Believe 40% of all dollars in existence were minted during the Biden administration. Um, the U.S. power in the world is manifestly lessened as a result of all of these shenanigans, economic, military, political, diplomatic, soft. Hollywood is completely worthless. So what is it keeping the country together? And you have these bitterly divided Americans who can't even agree on a common reality. And now you
Hmm.
have these people in the permanent bureaucracy saying, "Yeah, well, we can just make up facts as we go along, and what are you going to do about it?" Well, we
Yeah.
need to do something about it, otherwise, we're not going to have anything worth saving anymore. And I think that's the stakes here. And global thermonuclear war just happens to loom over our heads. So if we can solve all of these problems at once by putting some very, very guilty people either in jail or forever disgraced, that would be a good start, I think.
Well, I think you are more optimistic about it than I am. I mean, when I look at the
Um,
list of, I was just looking at the list here of those who had charges brought up against them for RussiaGate during RussiaGate, right? George Papadopoulos, Rick Gates, Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn, numerous, I mean, numbers, and there's tons of people on this list. Michael Cohen, Roger Stone, right?
well,
I mean,
Cohen is the one who's
granted,
actually guilty.
right, they were all charged with, and ultimately they ended up being convicted of just, lying to Congress or obstruction of justice, right? They never found anything that actually connected them to Russia, and there was any sort of Russiagate.
Right.
But I would imagine, but these were all, from a Democrat perspective, from the perspective of those watching, and I understand it was because there was no there, but from their perspective, they're like, why are we getting all these little guys? Like, why aren't we going after the big guys? We're just getting all these little guys for little things, and these are just auxiliary players, and they're not the main, they're not the big fish, right? We want Donald
Right.
Trump. And I think a lot of Republicans are looking at this whole scandal saying we want Obama. They're not going to get Obama. They're
They're
never
not
going
going
to
to
go
get Obama.
after Obama. So look, it's just going to be a bunch of little fish again that nobody knows, names that nobody knows. They might get charged. They might be dragged in front of Congress for hearings. They might end up getting obstruction because they can't really get them with sedition or insurrection, or because there just wasn't enough evidence there, just like the J6ers, to actually say, yes, you actually were trying to rise up and overthrow the government. There just won't be enough evidence there. And so in the end, they're all going to go for, maybe a little obstruction of justice, a little bit of lying to Congress, and that'll be the end of it.
Well, one of the things that Russiagate did when they couldn't get Trump, what they actually accomplished was poison the well in the public. That's one.
Yeah.
And two, they
Right.
terrorized anybody who wanted to work for Trump or wanted to work in the White House and implement his agenda. And that worked up to 2024, when all of these people that they had trampled over, joined hands, and you get the second Trump administration, which is the island of broken toys that seek to be made whole. And I don't think they seek revenge. Although they would be justified if they did, but these people deserve to be made whole, and so does the country. I don't want necessarily to see Obama in jail. I think that would be a bad precedent for treating former presidents. I thought the same thing when they tried to put Trump in jail and completely drummed up spurious charges in
Right.
90
Right.
counts in 5 different jurisdictions. Um, but I think that having it out publicly proven in court and a court of public opinion that these were not nice people who merely protected our democracy from foreign meddling, but people who invented foreign meddling so they could meddle, that they were traitors, that they were people who betrayed not just the country,
Mhm.
but their office, their jobs, their duty to frame a political opponent they disagreed with, should go a long way to, because let's face it, all of these people involved in Crossfire Hurricane. McCabe got a payout for by the Biden administration for being unlawfully fired. He wasn't unlawfully fired. He was fired for cause, but they
Yeah.
gave him millions. Kobe made millions on books that nobody read. Clapper and Brennan got hired by CNN and MSNBC, respectively.
Right.
All of these people were rewarded for what they did. And if there's any sense of justice in to be seen that, because America is ultimately built on a sense of justice, a lot of the amendments in the Bill of Rights deal with due process and rights, inalienable rights that government cannot take away, because the English crown did. They have to be made, the people they harmed need to be made whole, and they need to be punished. I don't necessarily want to see them behind bars. Most of them are very old people. They don't have long to live. But at the very least, their legacy should be mud forever.
Yeah.
And any of these illegal profits that they made off of their Russiagate lies ought to be redirected to their victims.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure that's going to happen. I'm not sure, but if there's any justice in America, people really should try.
Yeah, I'm sure it's just not gonna happen. But I look, I I I like that you're optimistic about it. I understand the gravity of it. I just also think that, I just don't think it's gonna happen. I mean, I just don't. I just think that the goose is cooked in this country. That has been shown to us over and over and over again, unfortunately, with, just in the last decade alone, between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, I would say the goose is cooked. And the reason I say that about them in particular is, Bernie Sanders, well, maybe we could even go back and start with Obama with this whole change and people voting. A lot of Republicans voted for Obama because they were wanting change. That's what they wanted. They wanted change. They thought, okay, this guy is saying some new things. He's got some new ideas. Let's go with it. And we didn't get any change. And then Bernie Sanders rose up and people really loved Bernie Sanders. Again, a lot of Republicans liked him. Democrats
I
liked him. A lot of
remember.
people liked Bernie Sanders. And what happened was the DNC crushed him. And then Bernie, rather than starting a third party and running off and actually do, what he could have done, he instead just folded right back on in.
Yeah,
And now he's just a puppet he claims to be an independent, but he's not an independent at all. And then you got Donald Trump, and everybody thought, well, okay, now here we go with this outsider throwing the Molotov cocktail into the system. Maybe he's actually going to blow it up. Maybe he's actually going to drain the swamp. And we're just getting, we just have replaced old swamp creatures with new swamp creatures. And we're not getting what we wanted. Now, I'm not saying he's doing all bad things. He's done a lot of great things, but we're still not getting a draining of the swamp. We're not getting the truth about a lot of things. His base cares about Epstein, whether he likes it or not.
Yep. And he needs to
And
understand that.
he doesn't, because something is there. And that is what's driving the suspicion. Right now, everybody is suspicious that Donald Trump is unfortunately being blackmailed. And quite honestly, we've got bigger fish to fry. I mean, this Russiagate thing is massive.
Yeah.
We now have evidence of American citizens who are undermining, in my mind, insurrection or sedition or whatever they want to label it. I think they're going to have a tough time figuring it out because the laws are a bit antiquated. They need to update the laws for this form of warfare against the country. This is more sophisticated. It's not gun storming, in your face, blatant insurrection in the form that the law is written for. It's a different kind, a subversion of a different kind. And it's extremely important. But honestly, the Epstein files are, in my mind, a bigger fish to fry. And that is because a foreign government has control over our country. That is problem number one. Americans, we could sit here and squabble with each other and fight with each other and do shit to each other all day. That's like a family fighting with family members. But outsiders coming in and infiltrating and taking control, that is a massive problem, because we can't even squabble amongst ourselves and fight with ourselves and have Russiagate be a problem with ourselves, because we instead have a foreign government in control of us. And they actually were the first ones to start the censorship. It didn't start with Russiagate. It actually started with Israel, because they were the ones that were encouraging the passing of anti-BDS laws across this country that now make it to where in 38 states in this country, you're not allowed free speech when it comes to the state of Israel. So we've had this, and that's been going on for years. So we've got this problem, to me, a bigger fish to fry, which is a foreign government has infiltrated and taken over. And what is our government doing about it? Nothing, absolutely nothing about it. So now they want us to say, oh, but we've got a problem with American against American. Okay, so what? So what if it doesn't matter at this point if one group of Americans have control or another group of Americans has control. Honestly, it doesn't matter because neither of them have control. So
Right.
they're not
If
doing
they
anything
both,
about any
yeah.
of this.
Yeah. And that's certainly basically, I often compared political analysis by, outsiders like me, because I obviously don't have access to the corridors of power. I'm like an astronomer trying to figure out where the planets are based on these calculations. I'm trying to find Jupiter because I can't see it.
Right.
And it's yeah, you got to look at what's getting done, what's happening in terms of actual political action at the highest level, who's getting defunded, who's getting arrested, who's getting charged, who's getting swapped out as ambassador, and so forth. And I'm seeing some things that are interesting when it comes to Ukraine. I'm seeing some things that are interesting in terms of Russia. I'm not seeing much of that pushback when it comes to Israel. And that is definitely not making me optimistic. You're right. But let's fall back on an analogy of the Roman Empire, because the American Republic was founded, patterned after the Roman Republic. When the late Roman Republic was in a crisis, they had this civil war between Marius and Sulla won, and he basically brutally crushed Marians. Um, expropriated took away their property, destroyed their lineages. It was a full on massacre. I mean, Sulla was a dictator, and he thought he'd solved the problem for a while, and it seemed like it. Except a generation after, you get Caesar and the Triumvirate, who are sort of refighting the same battle, and Caesar emerges victorious from that, and he gets accused of the rival faction of wanting to become emperor and assassinated. And they
Mhm.
think they'd save the Republic. What they get is his son saying, you know what, screw this. I'm going to be an emperor, and I'm going to finish the job Sulla didn't have the heart to finish. And he basically went scorched earth on any and all political opposition.
Mhm.
From the day Octavian destroyed Mark Antony, there was no Roman Republic. There only the name remained of the Senate. There was no political opposition for the next 500 years in Rome and for the next 1,000 years in Byzantium thereafter. No,
Mhm.
it was done. So this is sort of a cautionary tale of how messing with a system by people who think they can bend it to their will can backfire horribly. And I'm not
Mhm.
basically trying to assign anybody any role in this business. I'm not saying, Trump might be a Caesar. And if they get rid of Trump, they're going to get somebody who's as ruthless as Octavian, who's basically going to say, you know what? None of this Senate confirmation, congressional hearings, this is all rubbish. I'm just going to rule as a dictator. And by that point, the American public will be so tired of politics as usual and being dominated by outsiders and having their vote mean nothing. They're either going to be willing to get along with it because, my God, this is our long national nightmare is finally over, or they're going to start a civil war.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to talk civil war, I have stories to tell because I'm from the Balkans. But that's a separate episode, I think.
We would definitely have to have you back to talk about that. I think that actually would be a very interesting, um, that would be absolutely an interesting episode to discuss because I my family comes from Vietnam, and Vietnam had many wars, and my grandmother's still alive today. She's 97 years old, and she's lived through three different civil wars. Essentially, I mean, she escaped the North. She was North Vietnamese and left the North during that war with France, and then came to South. And then there was, of course, the American War, and she left after that, and then actually ended up in Iran until 1978 and then needed to leave Iran in 1978. Yeah, I have family members that were born in Iran and because that's where they were trying to make a life of some kind and ended up then in the United States. And this is one person's lifetime that they've had to basically run from country to country to country. And I think a lot of Americans in particular don't realize the fragility of systems. We just kind of
Yes.
take for granted and think it will never happen to us here. We would never reel into a civil war here. It just wouldn't happen. And I'm kind of inclined to think that's true. I think I think we would probably more likely decline like the Roman Empire, where it doesn't crumble because of military warfare or overtaking or civil wars or any sort, any sort of revolution. I just think we would just slowly crumble and go into chaos until, yeah, slow, just kind of a slow decline, a slow death. I'm inclined to think, because I just think that we have been conditioned at this point to just accept. I think what would happen is if the next, if the next dictator came along and said, "Wow, okay, I'm actually a dictator. We're not going to pretend it anymore. Yeah, the deep state has been running things for a long time, so we're just going to put it out there now." I think Americans would be like, "Yeah, okay." I mean, I just don't think we'd pick up guns and fight. I don't think we would. I think we just say, "Well, what's the difference?" I mean, honestly, what's the difference? You guys have
I,
been ignoring us this whole time anyway.
I used to think that Americans would resist that kind of dictatorship, and then COVID came.
Yeah,
We know
right,
better.
exactly. I mean, there you go. Perfect example.
Mm.
No resistance whatsoever to that, really. Not much.
Some in a handful of places, but I expected more.
Yeah, I mean, I really genuinely did not believe that Americans would go along with mandates or any of that type of stuff. And most did. Actually,
Way too
most
many
did.
did. Way too many
Most
did.
did. Most did. It was like 70%. So yeah, I just think, when it comes to, I guess the point being with Russiagate, is I don't have the optimism. I just don't think we're going to see anything. I think we do have bigger fish to fry, and we're not frying those fish. So, it's like the government is run by the deep state. Um, Powerful players they're never held accountable. I think that a lot of Republicans aren't going to pursue this for a very selfish reason, and it is to maintain, for one, it's to have the ability for they themselves to do the same tricks from the same playbook, you know, at a
Except they're
future date.
terrible at those tricks, and they
Yeah,
can't they
but
can't
still,
function that way. But I
if people
suppose.
go to jail for it, then that means you can't do it later when you want to do it.
But they just had 4 years in which the Democrats proved they don't really care about precedent, and the law being applied to them because they believe they're going to rule forever. So
Yeah,
if you
I mean,
don't really,
well, the deep
if you
state
don't
is ruling
establish
forever.
deterrence, well, that's the thing. If you don't establish deterrence, then that's it. That's kinetic warfare. And it's an issue Russia's struggling with because they're trying to be nice and not nuke people that arguably deserve it. But they're like, oh no, we don't do that. We're too nice. Well,
Yeah,
that's why you're having to fight in the trenches. Uh, it's it, sometimes mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent, and I think I think you're right about the deep state trying to control things and trying to hold people on both sides of the political aisle in check and saying, if you don't do this, we're going to release saucy details from your private life. And I think a lot of people in Washington, if Madison Cawthorn is to be believed, and he was primaried out after he said this, so there's got to be something there, are deeply compromised, and perhaps people can't be allowed to take political office without having some sort of compromise on
right.
file, so they can be kept in check. Which is
Yeah.
honestly, why I'm not really having too much faith in Congress. But you've had Trump, who's they've tried everything short of killing him, and they tried that too. And so
Yeah.
now he's in a singular position where he doesn't have to give a damn,
Yeah.
and he does have one weak spot, which is his affinity for a certain country and a certain prime minister, even though that certain prime minister doesn't care for him at all, that it seems to be blinding him to what he needs to do. And we'll see what happens. I remain
I mean,
vaguely
yeah,
optimistic because, yeah, I remain
they've
vaguely
got,
optimistic because the alternative is grim. The alternative is the quiet decay. The alternative is the long road into the bad infinity. And I just,
yeah, that's where
I've
I
lived
think
through
we
some
are.
wars. Well, I've
Yeah,
lived
that's
through a
where I
couple
think
of
we are.
wars, and I want to keep a positive outlook on life. But
Well,
again,
I
what
hear
I
you.
what I wish doesn't have to doesn't I'm trying to
I hear
analyze
you.
reality beyond what I want to happen.
Sure, sure. Well, look, I'm glad you're optimistic. We'll see what happens. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm often wrong when it comes to these types of predictions, but usually I'm wrong in the opposite direction. I usually
Mhm.
am thinking more positive, and then, like I thought, oh, there's no way Americans are going to go along with these mandates and lockdowns, and then, oh, gee, I was wrong with
Yeah.
that. I'm usually, with wars, I thought, oh, this will be done in a couple of weeks, and then, oh, I guess this wars keep going on for a couple of years. I mean, I'm usually more optimistic, and then I'm wrong, but we'll see if I'm wrong now that I'm being more pessimistic. Unfortunately, I've lost my optimism. I mean, I guess that's, unfortunately, it seems like I've lost my optimism. I guess that's a, a tough thing to realize. But Boysha, this has been an interesting conversation. Thank you for filling us in on everything starting from the beginning. I think it was good to have a refresher course on Russiagate and
Well,
to
thank you for inviting
remember.
me.
I mean, because really, when you put it all out there, it's like, yeah, this was so bad. I mean, this was so bad. People do need to go to jail. I mean, there needs to be accountability held for this. You can't just do this and get away with it. I just think they will, but they shouldn't be able to get away with this at all because this was a massive, massive issue. And really, it was an affront to the American people.
It
It's
was.
the American people voted for Trump. And then an entire deep state collaborated together, colluded together to try to undermine and ensure that that person who the American people voted for wouldn't be able to do his job. And that is really the victim is the American people.
Yeah,
And there should be accountability.
absolutely.
Boysha, where can people find you and your work?
So I live in Belgrade, Serbia right now, as of last year. I'm on Telegram as the Nebulator. I'm on
A
X as
nebulator.
at Knowledge.
That's great. Love
And
that.
as of a few months back, I have a Substack, also called the Nebulator, in the URL, but it's riffing off of the name of Belgrade, which means White City, so I call it White City Blues.
Okay. That's great. Well, we do have a link. We do have the links down below for how people can find you and read more of your work. And you're so informative. You're so insightful. Definitely people should be following you and supporting you in whatever way that they can. Thank you so much for being on. Really, really appreciate all of your insight. So great.
Thank you so very much for having me.
Hey guys, thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you could check out Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. See you there.